They said she didn't belong. They said a woman like her had no business touching a rifle, let alone claiming she could hit targets that seasoned marksmen missed. The instructors at Blackwater Ridge Academy laughed when she walked through there. Doors with nothing but a worn duffel bag and determination in her eyes. They stopped laughing when she made a shot that defied every law of physics they thought they knew. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn morning air hung thick with fog around Blackwater. Ridge Academy, a fortress of concrete and steel nestled deep in the Colorado mountains. This wasn't just any training facility. This was where the government sent their most promising candidates, where private military contractors scouted for their next generation of elite operatives, where legends were supposed to be born. The Academy's reputation was built on one simple principle: only the extraordinary survived here. Sarah Chen stepped off the shuttle bus at exactly 0600 hours, her worn hiking boots crunching against the gravel parking lot. The other passengers, all male, all looking like they'd stepped out of a military recruitment poster, filed past her without a second glance. She stood alone for a moment, adjusting the straps of her canvas duffel bag, watching as the fog slowly revealed the imposing structure before her. The Academy's main building rose 4 stories high, its windows tinted black, its walls scarred by decades of weather and training exercises. 2 massive flags hung from the entrance, one American, one bearing the Academy's insignia, a crosshair surrounded by mountains. Above the entrance, etched in granite, were the words that had drawn Sarah here, precision through perseverance. Sarah had memorized every detail about this place from the brochures she'd collected over the years. Blackwater Ridge Academy boasted a 90% failure rate. Of the hundreds who applied each year, only a dozen were accepted. Of those dozen, perhaps 2 would graduate. The program was designed to break even the strongest candidates, to strip away everything except pure skill and unbreakable will. She knew the statistics. She knew the stories. She knew that no woman had ever graduated from the Academy's sniper program. Not one. In 37 years of operation, through hundreds of classes, every single graduate had been male. The Academy didn't officially discriminate, but the message was clear. This was a man's world, and women were welcome to try, but they shouldn't expect to succeed. Sarah pushed through the heavy glass doors into the reception area. The lobby was designed to intimidate. Trophy cases lined the walls, filled with awards, commendations, and photographs of graduates who had gone on to serve in the world's most elite units. The floors were polished marble, the ceiling soared 20 feet high, and everything was bathed in the cold, clinical light of fluorescent fixtures. Behind the reception desk sat a woman in her 50s, her graying hair pulled back. In a tight bun, her uniform crisp and professional. A nameplate read Mrs. Davidson, Registrar. She looked up from her computer screen as Sarah approached, her expression neutral but her eyes already calculating. "Name?" Mrs. Davidson asked, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Sarah Chen. I'm here for the Advanced Marksmanship Program." Mrs. Davidson's fingers paused. She looked up, studying Sarah's face with renewed interest. "Chen, Sarah, yes, I see your file here." She clicked through several screens, her expression growing more curious with each page. "It says here you're coming from civilian status. That's correct. No prior military experience, no law enforcement background." "No, ma'am." Mrs. Davidson leaned back in her chair, her eyebrows raised. "Well, that's unusual. Most of our candidates come to us through military channels or private security firms. What's your background, Miss Chen?" Sarah had prepared for this question, but she still felt the familiar tightness in her chest. "I'm a librarian. I work at the Denver Public Library System." The silence that followed was deafening. Mrs. Davidson stared at her for a long moment. then looked back at her computer screen as if she might have misread something. "A librarian," she repeated. Slowly, "Yes, ma'am. And you're here for sniper training." "Advanced marksmanship," Sarah corrected gently, "but yes." Mrs. Davidson's expression shifted from surprise to something approaching amusement. "I see. Well, Miss Chen, I have to ask, what exactly qualifies a librarian for admission to one of the most elite shooting programs in the country?" Sarah had known this moment would come. She'd rehearsed her answer 100 times, but standing here in this intimidating lobby, facing this woman's skeptical gaze, the words felt hollow. "I've been shooting recreationally for 15 years. One holds several state-level competition records. I've completed advanced courses in ballistics, weather reading, and precision shooting. I scored in the 99th percentile on your entrance examination." "Recreational shooting," Mrs. Davidson repeated, making it sound like a hobby involving paper. "Airplanes." "Miss Chen, I don't think you understand what you're getting into here. This isn't a weekend shooting club. This is a professional training facility. Our instructors are former military snipers, Delta Force operators, Navy SEALs. Our students are preparing for combat situations, counter-terrorism operations, high-stakes assignments where a single missed shot could mean the difference between life and death. I understand that, do you?" Mrs. Davidson's voice had taken on a maternal tone, as if she were trying to protect Sarah from making a terrible mistake. "Miss Chen, I've been working here for 12 years. I've seen hundreds of candidates come through these doors. Strong men, experienced soldiers, people who've been preparing for this their entire lives. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And most of them don't make it. The physical demands alone are extraordinary. The psychological pressure is unlike anything you can imagine, and you want to attempt this as a librarian?" Sarah felt the familiar burn of frustration in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. "I paid the full tuition. I passed all the prerequisite tests. I understand the commitment required." Mrs. Davidson sighed and turned back to her computer. "Well, your paperwork appears to be in order, but I feel obligated to inform you that we have a very strict policy regarding refunds. Once you begin the program, there are no partial refunds for early departure. Given your background, I want to make sure you understand the financial commitment you're making." "I understand. The program is 8 weeks long. Room and board are included, but you'll be living in barrack-style accommodations. Meals are provided, but you'll eat what we serve when we serve it. There are no accommodations for dietary preferences or restrictions. Training begins at 0500 hours every day and continues until 2200 hours. There are no days off, no personal time, no contact with the outside world except in cases of emergency." Sarah nodded. She'd read all of this in the program materials. "Physical training is mandatory for all students. You'll be expected to maintain pace with candidates who may be significantly stronger and more experienced than you. There are no modified requirements based on gender or background. Everyone is held to the same standard. I wouldn't expect anything less." Mrs. Davidson studied her for another long moment, then shrugged. "Very well, you'll be assigned to Dormitory C, room 247. Your bunkmate will be Rebecca Martinez. She's also—" Mrs. Davidson paused, searching for the right words. "She's also a non-traditional candidate." Sarah wasn't sure what that meant, but she nodded anyway. "Your first formation is at 0500 hours tomorrow morning in the central courtyard. Uniform requirements are outlined in your welcome packet. Do you have any questions?" "No, ma'am." Mrs. Davidson handed her a manila envelope thick with papers and a key attached to a plastic tag. "Miss Chen, I hope you know what you're doing. This program has a way of humbling people. I'd hate to see you leave here feeling worse about yourself than when you arrived." Sarah took the envelope and key, shouldering her duffel bag. "Thank you for the concern, but I'll be fine." As she walked toward the elevator, Sarah heard Mrs. Davidson pick up her phone. "Colonel Harrison? You're going to want to hear about our latest recruit." The elevator ride to the 4th floor gave Sarah a few moments to process what had just happened. She'd expected skepticism, but the registrar's reaction had been more dismissive than she'd anticipated. It was as if the woman couldn't comprehend why someone like Sarah would even attempt something like this. Dormitory C was a long hallway lined with identical doors, each marked with a room number and 2 nameplates. Sarah found 247 and used her key to enter. The room was spartanly furnished: 2 single beds, 2 small desks, 2 narrow lockers, and a single window that looked out over the academy's shooting ranges. One bed was already occupied by personal items. A duffel bag sat at the foot of the bed, and various toiletries were arranged on the desk. Sarah's roommate had apparently arrived earlier. Sarah claimed the empty bed and began unpacking her belongings. She'd packed light, bringing only the essentials: a few changes of clothes, basic toiletries, a notebook and pens, and a small framed photograph of her parents. She placed the photograph on her desk and stepped back to survey her new home. The door opened behind her, and Sarah turned to see a woman about her own age entering the room. She was tall and athletic, with short brown hair and intelligent eyes. She wore civilian clothes, but she carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to physical challenges. "You must be Sarah," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Rebecca Martinez. Looks like we're roommates." Sarah shook her hand, noting the firm grip and calloused palms. "Nice to meet you. How long have you been here?" "Got in yesterday. Spent most of the day getting oriented, meeting some of the other candidates." Rebecca sat down on her bed, studying Sarah with curious eyes. "So what's your story? Military background?" "No, actually, I'm a librarian." Rebecca's eyebrows shot up. "A librarian? Seriously? Seriously? Wow, that's actually pretty cool. I mean, not what I expected, but cool." Rebecca grinned. "I'm a firefighter. EM'd a paramedic, actually. I've been doing search and rescue for about 8 years." "That's impressive. What brought you here?" Rebecca's expression grew more serious. "I've been working with tactical teams for the past few years. SWAT call-outs, hostage situations, that kind of thing. I realized I wanted to do more than just patch people up after the shooting stops. I want to be part of preventing the violence." "In the first place," Sarah nodded. Rebecca's background made infinitely more sense than her own. Search and rescue work required physical fitness, comfort with dangerous situations, and the ability to make life-or-death decisions under pressure. It was a natural progression to tactical training. "What about you?" Rebecca asked. "What brings a librarian to sniper school?" It was a question Sarah had been asked many times, and she'd never found a satisfactory answer. How could she explain? The nights spent reading military history, studying ballistics texts, learning about wind patterns and bullet trajectories. How could she describe the satisfaction she felt when she achieved a perfect shot, the way time seemed to slow down, and the world became perfectly clear? "I've always been interested in precision shooting," she said finally. "I started as a hobby, but I realized I had a talent for it. I wanted to see how far I could push myself." Rebecca nodded, accepting the explanation, even though Sarah could see the curiosity in her eyes. "Well, you certainly picked the right place for that. From what I've heard, this program will push you beyond anything you thought possible." "What have you heard?" "The other candidates have been sharing stories. Apparently, the instructors here are legendary. Colonel Harrison runs the program, and he's supposed to be one of the best snipers in military history. Then there's Sergeant Major Thompson, who's trained more successful snipers than anyone else in the country. And Master Sergeant Williams, who holds the record for longest confirmed kill shot." Sarah had researched all of these men during her preparation. Their reputations were intimidating, their accomplishments legendary. She'd studied their techniques, read their interviews, watched every video of their training methods she could. Fine. The physical training is supposed to be brutal, Rebecca continued. Long hikes with full gear, obstacle courses, endurance challenges. And that's just the beginning. The actual marksmanship training is where things get really intense. Have you met any of the other candidates? A few. There are 12 of us total. 10 men, 2 women. Most of the guys are former military, some active duty, a few from private security firms. Everyone seems pretty serious about being here. Sarah wondered about the other candidates. She'd known she would be outnumbered, but hearing it confirmed made her feel more isolated. She and Rebecca would be the only women in a program designed by men, for men. Are you nervous? Rebecca asked. Sarah considered the question. She'd felt many things preparing for this program: excitement, determination, anticipation. But nervous? She wasn't sure. I think I'm more curious than nervous. I want to see what I'm capable of. That's a good way to look at it. Me, I'm definitely nervous. I've done a lot of challenging things in my career, but this feels different. Like it's going to test parts of me I didn't even know existed. They talked for another hour, sharing stories about their backgrounds, their motivations, their expectations. Rebecca was easy to talk to, and Sarah found herself relaxing despite the intimidating environment. At least she wouldn't be completely alone in this experience. At 1800 hours, they made their way to the dining hall for dinner. The space was large and utilitarian, with long tables and bench seating. About 50 people were scattered throughout. The room, a mix of instructors, staff, and students from various programs. Sarah and Rebecca found seats at a table near the back, joining a group of candidates from their program. The men at the table were exactly what Sarah had expected. They were large, fit, and confident, with the kind of easy camaraderie that came from shared military experience. They welcomed Rebecca warmly, clearly recognizing her as one of their own despite her civilian status. Their reaction to Sarah was more reserved. "So you're the librarian," said a man who introduced himself as Marcus Johnson, a former Marine. "That's interesting." "I imagine it is," Sarah replied, keeping her tone neutral. "No offense, but I'm curious about how you ended up here. This isn't exactly the kind of place most people stumble into by accident." Sarah gave him the same explanation she'd given Rebecca, but she could see the skepticism in his eyes. These men had spent years preparing for this moment, and they couldn't understand how someone with no military background could possibly belong here. "Recreational shooting," repeated another candidate, David Kim, who'd identified himself as former Army Rangers. "What kind of distances are we talking about?" "I compete regularly at 1,000 yards, Sarah said. "I've shot accurately at 1,500 yards. "In training." The table fell silent. These were impressive distances, even for experienced shooters. Several of the men exchanged glances. "What kind of rifle?" asked a third candidate, Tony Garcia, formerly of the Navy SEALs. "I primarily use a Remington 700 in 308 Winchester. Custom barrel, adjustable trigger, high-quality optics." "That's a solid platform," Marcus admitted grudgingly. "What's your best group at 1,000 yards?" 3 shots in a 4-inch circle, another silence. 4 inches at 1,000 yards was exceptional accuracy for anyone, let alone a recreational shooter. "Well," said David finally, "I guess we'll see what you can do when the pressure's on." The conversation moved on to other topics, but Sarah could feel the men's eyes on her throughout the meal. They were re-evaluating her, trying to reconcile her civilian background with her claimed abilities. She was used to this reaction. Male shooters often assumed that women couldn't compete at their level, and her professional background only reinforced their skepticism. After dinner, Sarah and Rebecca returned to their room to prepare for the next day. As they laid out their uniforms and equipment, Rebecca voiced what Sarah had been thinking. "They don't know what to make of you," she said. "I could see it in their faces. They're not sure if you're going to be competition or if you're going to wash out in the first week. What do you think?" Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "I think you're going to surprise them. There's something about you, Sarah. You're calm in a way that most people aren't. Like you've already seen whatever's coming and you're ready for it." Sarah didn't respond, but she appreciated Rebecca's assessment. She had spent years preparing for this moment, not just physically but mentally. She'd visualized every scenario, studied every technique, prepared for every challenge she might face. She was as ready as she could be. At 2,200 hours, the lights in the dormitory went out and the academy fell silent. Sarah lay in her narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the mountain night outside her window. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the faint sound of gunfire from the night training ranges. Tomorrow, she would begin the most challenging 8 weeks of her life. She thought about the conversation with Mrs. Davidson, about the skeptical looks from the other candidates, about the statistics that said she had almost no chance of success. She thought about all the people who had told her she was wasting her time, that she should stick to what she knew, that some dreams were too big for ordinary people. But Sarah had never considered herself ordinary. She'd always been different, always pushed herself harder than others expected. When she was 12, she'd taught herself to shoot with her grandfather's old rifle. When she was 16, she'd won her first shooting competition against opponents twice her age. When she was 22, she'd graduated summa cum laude from library school while working 2 jobs to pay for her education. She'd spent her entire life proving that she was capable of more than people expected. Tomorrow, she would begin proving it again. The last thought Sarah had before falling asleep was of the photograph on her desk. Her parents had always supported her dreams, no matter how unconventional they seemed. Her father, a quiet man who worked as a mechanic, had taught her that precision and patience were the keys to any difficult task. Her mother, a teacher, had shown her that knowledge was power, that understanding the theory behind a skill was just as important as practicing it. They would be proud of her for taking this chance, regardless of how it ended. And that knowledge gave her the strength to face whatever tomorrow would bring. At 0500 hours, the academy would wake up, the real test would begin. And Sarah Chen, the librarian who didn't belong, would have her first chance to prove that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one nobody sees coming. The alarm shattered the pre-dawn silence at exactly 0500 hours. Sarah's eyes opened immediately, her internal clock already synchronized with the academy's rigid schedule. Around her, the dormitory erupted into controlled chaos as candidates scrambled to dress and prepare for their first official day of training. Rebecca was already moving, her firefighter training evident in her efficient morning routine. "You ready for this?" she asked, pulling on her boots with practice speed. Sarah nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure what this would entail. The Academy's orientation materials had been deliberately vague about the specific challenges candidates would face. The only certainty was that every day would push them closer to their breaking point. The central courtyard was a vast expanse of concrete, surrounded by the Academy's main buildings. Floodlights illuminated the space with harsh white light, creating sharp shadows that seemed to emphasize the austere military atmosphere. 12 candidates stood in a loose formation, their breath visible in the cold mountain air. Colonel Harrison emerged from the main building at exactly 0510 hours. He was a tall man with graying hair and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail with ruthless efficiency. His uniform was immaculate, his posture perfect, and his presence commanded immediate attention. Behind him walked 3 other instructors, each carrying themselves with the quiet confidence of men who had seen combat and survived. "Welcome to Blackwater Ridge Academy," Colonel Harrison said, his voice carrying easily across the courtyard despite its measured tone. Over the next 8 weeks, we will determine which of you possess the physical capability, mental fortitude, and technical skill necessary to become precision marksmen. Most of you will fail. This is not a reflection of your worth as human beings, but simply an acknowledgement that this profession demands abilities that few possess. He began pacing in front of the formation, his eyes moving from candidate to candidate. You come from different backgrounds, different services, different levels of experience. None of that matters here. What matters is your ability to perform under pressure, to make split-second decisions with life or death consequences, and to maintain absolute precision when everything around you is chaos. His gaze lingered on Sarah for a moment longer than the others. Some of you may believe that your previous accomplishments guarantee success here. You are mistaken. Some of you may believe that you don't belong here. You are also mistaken. The only thing that matters is what you demonstrate over the next 8 weeks. Sergeant Major Thompson stepped forward. He was shorter than the colonel, but built like a boxer, with scarred hands and eyes that had seen too much. Physical training begins now. You will complete a 5-mile run through the mountain trails, followed by an obstacle course, followed by strength and endurance assessments. This is not a competition between candidates. This is an evaluation of your individual capabilities. The run began immediately. No warm-up, no gradual introduction to the altitude and terrain. The candidates were simply expected to keep pace, with Sergeant Major Thompson as he led them onto a trail that disappeared into the pine forest surrounding the academy. Sarah had prepared for this. She'd spent months conditioning herself for high-altitude endurance work, running increasingly challenging routes through the Colorado mountains near her home. But she quickly realized that no amount of preparation could have fully readied her for the intensity of this pace. Thompson set a brutal rhythm, his boots pounding against the rocky trail with metronomic precision. Behind him, the candidates spread out according to their conditioning and experience. The former military personnel clustered near the front, their breathing controlled and their strides efficient. Rebecca held a position in the middle of the pack, her search and rescue training serving her well in the mountainous terrain. Sarah found herself toward the back, not because she lacked endurance, but because she was still adjusting to the group dynamics. She could have pushed forward, could have tried to prove herself by matching the pace of the men ahead of her, but she chose instead to run her own race. She focused on maintaining steady breathing, on conserving energy for whatever challenges would follow the run. The trail wound through dense forests and across exposed ridges, climbing steadily toward the peaks that surrounded the academy. The altitude made every breath precious, and the rocky terrain demanded constant attention to foot placement. Several candidates began to struggle after the 3rd mile, their breathing becoming labored and their pace slowing. Marcus Johnson, the former Marine who had questioned Sarah at dinner, was one of the first to show signs of distress. His face had turned red, and sweat poured down his forehead despite the cold air. He kept glancing back at Sarah, clearly frustrated that she was maintaining her pace while he struggled. By the 4th mile, 2 candidates had fallen significantly behind. David Kim, despite his ranger background, was walking more than running, his hands on his knees as he fought to catch his breath. Tony Garcia was faring better, but was clearly pushing himself beyond his comfort zone. Sarah, meanwhile, had found her rhythm. The steady climb reminded her of training runs she'd done in preparation for this program. She'd spent countless weekends hiking and running in high-altitude conditions, gradually building the cardiovascular base necessary for sustained effort in thin air. Her breathing was controlled, her pace steady, and she was actually gaining ground on some of the candidates ahead of her. Thompson called out mile markers as they passed them, but he offered no encouragement, no acknowledgement of individual performance. He simply maintained his relentless pace, indifferent to the suffering of those struggling to keep up. The final mile included a steep climb up a rocky slope that challenged both cardiovascular fitness and technical hiking skills. Sarah's library work had required long hours of precise, focused activity, but it had also given her time to pursue her outdoor interests. She'd spent years rock climbing and mountaineering, developing the balance and technique necessary for difficult terrain. She passed Marcus on the final climb, her stride confident and controlled. He looked at her with a mixture of surprise and irritation, unable to understand how someone with her background was outperforming him. She didn't acknowledge his stare, focusing instead on the trail ahead and the steady rhythm of her breathing. The run ended back at the academy's main compound, where Thompson waited with a stopwatch and a clipboard. As candidates staggered across the finish line, he noted their times without comment. Sarah finished in the middle of the pack, her time respectable, if not spectacular. More importantly, she looked fresh, as if she could have continued for several more miles. Rebecca finished just behind her, breathing hard but smiling. "Nice run," she said between breaths. "You looked like you were just getting warmed up." "I feel pretty good," Sarah admitted. "The altitude is challenging, but I've been training for it." Around them, several candidates were bent over, hands on their knees, struggling to recover. Marcus sat on the ground, his face pale and his breathing shallow. David was walking in small circles, trying to prevent his muscles from cramping. Thompson allowed exactly 5 minutes for recovery, then led the group to the obstacle course. The structure was a maze of walls, ropes, tunnels, and barriers designed to test every aspect of physical capability. Unlike obstacle courses Sarah had seen at civilian fitness facilities, this one looked genuinely dangerous. The walls were high, the gaps wide, and the margins for error minimal. "This course will evaluate your strength, agility, coordination, and problem-solving ability," Thompson announced. "You will complete it individually, and your performance will be timed. There is only one rule: you must complete every obstacle. If you fail to complete an obstacle, you will repeat the entire course until you succeed." The first candidate to attempt the course was Tony Garcia. Despite his struggles during the run, he attacked the obstacles with determination and skill. His Navy SEAL training was evident in his technique, and he completed the course in just under 12 minutes. One by one, the candidates took their turns. The course proved to be a great equalizer, revealing strengths and weaknesses that weren't apparent during the run. Some of the men who had dominated the endurance portion struggled with obstacles that required finesse and problem-solving rather than brute strength. Rebecca's turn came 8th in the rotation. Her approach was methodical and efficient, her firefighter training evident in the way she assessed each obstacle before attempting it. She completed the course in 14 minutes, a respectable time. That earned a rare nod of approval from Thompson. Sarah was the 10th candidate to attempt the course. As she stood at the starting line, she could feel the eyes of the other candidates on her. Some were curious, others skeptical, all waiting to see how the librarian would handle obstacles designed for elite military personnel. The first obstacle was a 12-foot wall with a rope hanging down one side. Sarah approached it with the same calm focus she brought to everything else. She'd spent years rock climbing, and the technique for scaling walls was familiar to her. She climbed efficiently, using her legs to drive upward while her arms provided balance and control. The second obstacle was a series of monkey bars spanning a 20-foot gap. This was where many candidates struggled, as it required significant upper body strength and grip endurance. Sarah had prepared for this specifically, spending months building her pull-up capacity and grip strength. She moved across the bars smoothly, her library work having given her the finger strength necessary for sustained gripping. The third obstacle was a tunnel crawl through a concrete pipe that was barely wide enough for an adult body. This challenge was about mental toughness as much as physical capability, as many people struggled with the claustrophobic conditions. Sarah entered the tunnel without hesitation, her smaller frame actually giving her an advantage in the confined space. She emerged from the tunnel to find the fourth obstacle, a rope climb to a platform 20 feet above the ground. This was pure technique and strength, requiring the climber to use their entire body efficiently. Sarah had learned proper rope climbing technique during her mountaineering training, and she ascended quickly using the wrap and lock method that minimized energy expenditure. The fifth obstacle was a balance beam that spanned a pit filled with cold water. The beam was only 6 inches wide and 20 feet long, and it was deliberately slippery. Several candidates had fallen into the water, forcing them to complete the rest of the course in wet clothes. Sarah approached the beam with the same focus she brought to precision shooting, using her core strength and balance to maintain control as she crossed. The sixth and final obstacle was a cargo net that required candidates to climb over a structure that resembled the side of a ship. The net was unstable and required climbers to constantly adjust their grip and body position. Sarah's rock climbing experience served her well here, as she was comfortable with the feeling of being on an unstable surface. She completed the course in 11 minutes and 43 seconds, the third fastest time of the day. More impressive than her speed was her apparent ease with the challenges. While other candidates had struggled, grunted, and strained there way through the obstacles, Sarah had moved with quiet efficiency. Thompson made a note on his clipboard, but offered no comment. The other candidates stared at her with newfound respect and wariness. Marcus, who had struggled through the course in nearly 18 minutes, looked particularly troubled. The morning's physical training concluded with strength and endurance assessments. Pull-ups, push-ups, sit-ups, and other exercises designed to measure raw physical capability. Again, Sarah performed well, not dominating but clearly demonstrating that she belonged on the same field as the other candidates. By 1200 hours, the group was exhausted and ready for lunch. The dining hall was quieter than it had been the previous evening, with candidates too tired to maintain much conversation. Sarah noticed that the dynamics at the table had shifted. The easy dismissal of her presence had been replaced by a more cautious evaluation. "So," said David Kim, still breathing heavily from the morning's exertions, "that was quite a performance on the obstacle course." Sarah looked up from her meal. "Thank you. Where did you learn to climb like that? That wasn't beginner technique." "I've been rock climbing for about 10 years. Mountaineering for 6. Marcus leaned forward. "Mountaineering? Like what kind of climbs?" "Mostly Colorado 14ers. Some technical climbs in the Rockies. I've done a few expeditions in Alaska and the Cascades." The table fell silent again. Mountaineering was serious business, requiring physical conditioning, technical skill, and mental toughness. It wasn't a hobby for casual weekend warriors. "That explains a lot," Rebecca said. "I was wondering how you made that balance beam look so easy." Tony Garcia, who had been quiet during the meal, finally spoke up. "You know, I'm starting to think we might have underestimated you." Sarah appreciated the acknowledgement, but didn't let it change her demeanor. "We all have different backgrounds. That's what makes this interesting." After lunch, the real purpose of the academy finally became apparent. The candidates were led to the main shooting complex, a state-of-the-art facility that included indoor ranges, outdoor ranges, and specialized training areas for various scenarios. Master Sergeant Williams was waiting for them. He was a lean man in his 40s with intelligent eyes and hands that showed the calluses of someone who had spent decades handling firearms. His reputation preceded him, legends of impossible shots, made under conditions that would have broken lesser men. "This afternoon, we begin your evaluation as marksmen," Williams announced. "Before we can teach you advanced techniques, we need to understand your current capabilities. Each of you will demonstrate your shooting skills using standardized equipment under controlled conditions." The evaluation began with basic marksmanship at 100 yards. Each candidate was given an identical rifle, a standard bolt-action platform with basic optics. The target was a simple bullseye, and each shooter was allowed 10 rounds to demonstrate their accuracy. The first few candidates performed adequately, grouping their shots within acceptable parameters for trained shooters. None of them were exceptional, but all demonstrated basic competency with the weapon. When Sarah's turn came, she approached the rifle with the same calm focus she had shown all day. She spent several minutes familiarizing herself with the weapon, checking the scope adjustments, testing the trigger pull, and examining the ammunition. The other candidates watched with interest, noting her methodical approach. Her first shot was a perfect bullseye. The second was equally precise, landing so close to the first that it was difficult to distinguish the two holes. By the fifth shot, it was clear that something unusual was happening. Sarah wasn't just hitting the target, she was creating a group, so tight that it looked like a single large hole rather than multiple shots. William stepped forward to examine the target through his spotting scope. His expression remained neutral, but Sarah could see surprise in his eyes. After her 10th shot, he called for a ceasefire and walked down to examine the target personally. The group measured less than half an inch at 100 yards. It was the kind of accuracy that professional bencherous shooters struggled to achieve with specialized equipment and unlimited time. Sarah had accomplished it with an unfamiliar rifle under evaluation conditions. Williams returned to the firing line carrying the target. He held it up for the other candidates to see, and a murmur of amazement rippled through the group. Marcus stared at the target with his mouth slightly open. David shook his head in disbelief. Even Rebecca, who had begun to expect exceptional performance from her roommate, looked stunned. "This is exceptional shooting," William said, his voice carefully neutral. "However, accuracy at 100 yards is only the beginning of what we do here. Let's see how everyone performs as we increase the distance and complexity." The evaluation continued throughout the afternoon, with distances extending to 300 yards, then 500 yards, then 800 yards. At each distance, Sarah continued to demonstrate remarkable accuracy. Her groups remained tight, her consistency unwavering, and her approach calm and methodical. But it was at 1,000 yards that she truly distinguished herself from the other candidates. At this distance, factors like wind, humidity, barometric pressure, and even the rotation of the Earth became significant variables. Most of the candidates struggled to hit the target consistently, their shots scattered across the target face or missing entirely. Sarah, however, seemed unaffected by the increased difficulty. She spent several minutes studying the conditions, making notes in a small notebook she carried, and calculating adjustments for her scope. When she fired, her shots continued to group tightly in the center of the target. Williams watched through his spotting scope, calling out each shot as it landed. "Center, center, center." His voice carried a note of amazement that he couldn't quite suppress. After the 1,000-yard evaluation, Williams called for a break. He approached Sarah as she was cleaning the rifle, his expression thoughtful. "Miss Chen, I need to ask you a question, and I want you to answer honestly. Have you ever received professional training as a marksman?" Sarah looked up from the rifle. "No, sir. All of my shooting has been self-taught or learned through civilian instructors." "Self-taught." Williams repeated the words as if he couldn't quite believe them. "And you've achieved this level of accuracy through recreational shooting?" "Yes, sir. I've been studying ballistics and shooting techniques for 15 years. I've read everything I could find on the subject, practiced consistently, and gradually worked my way up to longer distances." Williams was quiet for a long moment. "Miss Chen, what you've demonstrated today is not recreational level shooting. This is the kind of accuracy we expect from our graduates, not our incoming students." Sarah wasn't sure how to respond to that, so she remained silent. "I'm going to ask you to demonstrate one more skill this afternoon." We're going to move to the 1,500-yard range, and I want to see what you can do at extended distance." The 1,500-yard range was located on a separate part of the academy grounds, a vast shooting complex that stretched across a mountain valley. The targets were barely visible to the naked eye, small steel plates that rang when hit. The conditions were challenging, with variable winds and changing light as the afternoon sun moved across the sky. Sarah was the only candidate asked to attempt the 1,500-yard shot. The others gathered behind the firing line to watch, their earlier skepticism replaced by genuine curiosity. Even the instructor seemed interested in seeing what would happen. Williams set up a spotting scope and positioned himself where he could observe both Sarah and the target. "This is a cold-bore shot," he announced. "One round, no sighters, no warm-up, just you, the rifle, and the target." Sarah nodded and began her preparation. She spent nearly 15 minutes studying the conditions, making calculations in her notebook and adjusting the scope. The wind was variable, gusting from different directions at different strengths. The light was beginning to change as clouds moved across the sun. The temperature was dropping as evening approached. She loaded a single round into the rifle and settled into her shooting position. The target was so distant that it was difficult to see even through the scope. Sarah controlled her breathing, settled the crosshairs, and waited for the perfect moment when all the variables aligned. The shot broke with a crisp crack that echoed across the valley. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, faintly, they heard the distinctive ring of steel on steel as the bullet found its target. Williams looked through his spotting scope and confirmed. The hit, center hit at 1,500 yards, cold bore, first round. The silence that followed was profound. Even the instructors seemed stunned by what they had witnessed. A 1,500-yard cold bore shot was difficult for experienced snipers with familiar equipment. For a civilian with no formal training to accomplish it on her first attempt was simply unprecedented. Sarah stood up and began packing the rifle, her expression unchanged. She had expected to hit the target, had calculated every variable and adjusted for every condition. The shot had gone exactly where she had intended it to go. But for everyone watching, something fundamental had shifted. The librarian who didn't belong had just demonstrated skills that most of them would never achieve. The woman they had dismissed as a tourist had proven herself to be something entirely different. As they walked back to the main complex, Rebecca fell into step beside Sarah. "That was incredible," she said quietly. "I've never seen anything like that." "Thank you," Sarah replied, but her tone was distant. She was already thinking about tomorrow, about the challenges that lay ahead, about the fact that this was only the beginning. Behind them, the male candidates walked in small groups, their conversations subdued. Marcus kept looking back at Sarah, his expression troubled. David was shaking his head, as if he still couldn't believe what he had witnessed. Tony was quiet, lost in thought. The instructors walked separately, their own conversations too quiet to overhear. But Sarah could sense that something had changed in their assessment of her as well. The question was no longer whether she belonged here. The question was what exactly she was capable of. That evening at dinner, the atmosphere was different. The easy camaraderie of the previous night had been replaced by a more complex dynamic. Sarah was no longer the outsider looking in. She had earned her place at the table through performance, not politics. But she could also sense the beginning of something else: competition, resentment, the recognition that she might be more than just another candidate, that she might actually be someone to beat. As she lay in her bunk that night, Sarah reflected on the day's events. She had performed well, perhaps better than she had expected, but she knew that this was only the beginning. The real challenges lay ahead in the advanced training modules. The complex scenarios, the psychological pressure that was designed to break even the strongest candidates. She thought about the look in William's eyes when he had confirmed her 1,500-yard hit. It was a look of recognition, of professional respect, but also of curiosity. He wanted to know what else she was capable of, how far her skills extended, what she would do when the stakes were raised even higher. Sarah was looking forward to finding out as well. For the first time in her life, she was in an environment where her abilities were being tested to their limits, where her passion for precision and accuracy was not just accepted, but demanded, where she could discover the full extent of what she was capable of achieving. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, new opportunities to prove herself. And Sarah Chen, the librarian who had surprised everyone including herself, was ready for whatever came next. The third week at Blackwater Ridge Academy brought a shift in atmosphere that everyone could feel, but no one openly discussed. Sarah's exceptional performance during the initial evaluations had created ripples that extended far beyond the shooting ranges. Instructors who had initially viewed her as an anomaly now watched her with the careful attention reserved for genuine prospects. Fellow candidates who had dismissed her as out of place now studied her techniques with barely concealed fascination and growing concern. Colonel Harrison called Sarah to his office on a Tuesday morning after the daily physical training session. His office occupied a corner of the main administration building, its windows offering a commanding view of the mountain ranges that surrounded the academy. The walls were lined with photographs spanning decades of military service, commendations from various conflicts, and group photos of graduating classes stretching back to the academy's founding. "Please, sit down, Miss Chen," Harrison said, gesturing to a chair positioned in front of his desk. His manner was formal, but not unfriendly, the tone of a professional trying to solve a puzzle. "I've been reviewing your performance records from the past 3 weeks, and I find myself in an unusual position." Sarah settled into the chair, her posture relaxed but attentive. She had expected this conversation, though she wasn't entirely sure what direction it would take. "In 37 years of running this program," Harrison continued, "I have never encountered a candidate quite like you. Your shooting scores are not just exceptional, they're unprecedented. Your tactical awareness during field exercises has impressed instructors who thought they had seen everything. Your physical performance, while not dominating, has been consistently solid despite your lack of military conditioning." He opened a thick file folder and spread several papers across his desk. Sarah could see shooting scores, evaluation forms, and what appeared to be detailed notes from various instructors. "Master Sergeant Williams tells me that your long-range accuracy is already superior to most of our graduates. Sergeant Major Thompson notes that your field craft and stealth movement techniques are instinctive in a way that usually takes years to develop. Even your academic performance in our ballistics and meteorology courses is outstanding." Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah with eyes that had evaluated hundreds of candidates over the decades. "This leads me to a question that I need you to answer with complete honesty. Have you ever served in any military capacity, official or unofficial?" "No, sir. I have never served in any military organization." "Intelligence services, federal law enforcement, private military, contractors?" "No, sir. I've been a civilian my entire life." Harrison was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming silently on the desk. "Miss Chen, what you're demonstrating here goes beyond natural talent. The level of skill you've shown typically requires years of professional training and real-world experience. I'm not questioning your honesty, but I am struggling to understand how someone with your background has achieved these capabilities." Sarah had anticipated this question and had prepared her answer carefully. "Sir, I've been studying marksmanship and related disciplines for 15 years. Not casually, but with the dedication most people reserve for their careers. I've read every technical manual I could find, studied ballistics tables until I could calculate trajectories in my head, practiced in every weather condition and terrain type available to me." She paused, organizing her thoughts. I've also had access to resources that most recreational shooters don't. The Denver Public Library System has an extensive collection of military manuals, technical publications, and historical documents. I've studied accounts of famous snipers, analyzed their techniques, and adapted their methods to my own practice. Harrison raised an eyebrow. You learned sniper techniques from library books? From library books, online courses, video analysis, and thousands of hours of practice. I approached it like any other subject I wanted to master. I studied the theory, learned the fundamentals, and then practiced until the techniques became automatic. And the fieldcraft, the movement techniques, the tactical awareness? I've spent most of my free time for the past decade in wilderness areas, hunting, hiking, camping, rock climbing. I learned to move quietly because I was often alone in areas with dangerous wildlife. I learned to observe my surroundings carefully because my safety depended on it. I developed patience because many of my outdoor activities required waiting for the right conditions. Harrison nodded slowly, apparently accepting her explanation even if he didn't fully understand it. There's another matter we need to discuss. Your presence here has created some tension among the other candidates. Sarah had noticed this but hadn't been sure how to address it. I'm aware that my performance has surprised some people. It's more than surprise, Miss Chen. Some of the candidates are beginning to view you as a threat to their own success. This is natural in any competitive environment, but it's becoming disruptive to the cohesion we try to maintain in our classes. Harrison pulled out another folder, this one containing what appeared to be incident reports. There have been several episodes. Equipment mysteriously malfunctioning before your range sessions. Training schedules being altered without your knowledge. Small acts of sabotage that could be dismissed as accidents if taken individually. Sarah felt a flash of anger but kept her expression neutral. I haven't reported any of these incidents. We know. You've handled them quietly and professionally, which is to your credit. But we can't allow this behavior to continue. It compromises the safety and integrity of our program. He leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. Miss Chen, I'm going to ask you to do something that may seem counterproductive. I want you to fail. Sarah blinked, certain she had misheard. Sir? Not genuinely fail. But I want you to moderate your performance for the next few weeks. Make some mistakes. Miss some shots you would normally hit. Struggle with challenges you could easily overcome. Give the other candidates a chance to feel competitive again. Sarah stared at him, processing the request. You want me to deliberately perform below my capabilities? I want you to diffuse a situation that's becoming dangerous. These men have spent years preparing for this program. They've built their identities around being elite warriors, the best of the best. Having that challenged by someone they perceive as an outsider is creating psychological pressure that's manifesting in destructive ways. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications of what Harrison was asking. And if I refuse, then I'll have to make a difficult decision about whether your continued presence here is worth the risk to the other candidates' psychological well-being and the program's overall success. The threat was politely delivered, but unmistakable. Sarah could either deliberately underperform or risk being removed from the program entirely. How long would you want me to maintain this moderated performance? Until graduation. You've already demonstrated your capabilities. Your final evaluation will be based on what we've seen, not on your performance during training exercises. You'll still graduate at the top of the class, but the other candidates won't feel completely dominated. Sarah stood up, her mind racing through the implications of this conversation. She had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to risk being removed from the program. But the idea of deliberately failing went against everything she believed about integrity and honest effort. I need some time to think about this, sir, of course. But I'll need your decision by tomorrow morning. And Miss Chen, this conversation remains confidential. If word of this discussion reaches the other candidates, it could make the situation even worse. Sarah left Harrison's office feeling more conflicted than she had since arriving at the academy. She walked slowly back to the dormitory, her mind churning through the colonel's request and its implications. Rebecca was waiting in their room, reading a ballistics manual while taking notes. She looked up as Sarah entered, immediately noticing her troubled expression. "Everything okay? You look like someone just told you Christmas was canceled." Sarah sat down on her bed, staring at the wall. "Rebecca, can I ask you something hypothetically?" "Sure. If you were performing exceptionally well in a program, but your success was making other people feel threatened and causing problems, would you deliberately perform worse to keep the peace?" Rebecca set down her book, recognizing that this wasn't really a hypothetical question. "That's a tough one. I guess it would depend on why I was in the program in the first place." "What do you mean?" "Well, if I was there to prove something to myself, then I'd probably keep performing at my best, regardless of what other people thought. But if I was there to achieve a specific goal, and deliberately performing worse would help me reach that goal, then I might consider it." Sarah nodded, appreciating Rebecca's thoughtful response. "What if performing worse went against everything you believed about integrity and honest effort?" "Then I'd have to decide which was more important, my principles or my goals. Sometimes those things come into conflict and there's no easy answer." Sarah spent the rest of the day thinking about Harrison's request. She went through the motions of training, but her mind was elsewhere. During the afternoon shooting session, she found herself automatically adjusting for wind and elevation, then catching herself and wondering if she should deliberately miss. The other candidates seemed to sense her distraction. Marcus, who had been increasingly hostile since Sarah's exceptional long-range demonstration, made several cutting comments about people who thought they were better than everyone else. David and Tony were more subtle but equally pointed in their remarks about team players and the importance of fitting in. Only Rebecca seemed genuinely supportive, though even she appeared to be struggling with the dynamics in the group. The easy camaraderie of the first week had been replaced by an undercurrent of tension and competition that affected everyone. That evening, Sarah made her decision. She found Harrison in his office, working late on administrative tasks. "Colonel, I've thought about your request, and I can't do what you're asking." Harrison looked up from his paperwork, his expression unreadable. "I see. Can you tell me why?" "Because it would compromise everything I believe about honest effort and personal integrity. I came here to test my limits and see what I'm capable of achieving. If I deliberately perform below my capabilities, then I'm not really testing anything, I'm just playing a role." Harrison leaned back in his chair. "Even if it means risking your place in the program? Even then, if I can't succeed here by being myself and performing to the best of my abilities, then I don't deserve to succeed at all." Harrison studied her for a long moment, then surprised her by smiling. "That's exactly what I hoped you would say." Sarah blinked. "Sir?" "Miss Chen, that conversation was as much a test as any shooting exercise or field problem. I needed to know what kind of person you are when faced with a difficult choice. Would you compromise your principles for convenience? Would you take the easy path when things got difficult?" Sarah felt a mixture of relief and irritation. "So you never actually wanted me to deliberately fail?" "Oh, the problems with the other candidates are real enough. But I've been dealing with competitive young men for 37 years. I know how to manage their egos and channel their competitive instincts in productive directions." Harrison stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening mountains. "What I needed to know was whether you're the kind of person who will do whatever it takes to achieve a goal, even if it means abandoning your principles. That kind of person might make a technically proficient sniper, but they wouldn't make a trustworthy one." He turned back to face her. "The scenarios we're preparing you for aren't just about hitting targets at long range. They're about making life and death decisions under extreme pressure. They're about maintaining moral clarity when everything around you is chaos. They're about being trusted with capabilities that could be devastating if misused. Sarah began to understand the broader purpose of the conversation. You are evaluating my character, not just my shooting skills. Exactly. And you passed that evaluation as decisively as you've passed every other test we've given you. Harrison returned to his desk and opened another file folder. Which brings me to the real reason I called you here today. Miss Chen, based on your performance over the past 3 weeks, I'm recommending you for accelerated advancement. Sarah wasn't sure what that meant. Accelerated advancement? Normally, our program runs for 8 weeks with a graduation exercise in the final week. I'm recommending that you skip ahead to participate in a special assessment that we typically reserve for our most exceptional candidates. He pulled out a photograph showing a mountain peak in the distance, 3,000 meters. That's the distance for the advanced long-range assessment. It's not part of the standard curriculum because most candidates aren't capable of making accurate shots at that distance, even after completing the full program. Sarah studied the photograph, noting the challenging terrain and extreme distance. When would this assessment take place? Tomorrow. You would be the first candidate in the Academy's history to attempt the 3,000-meter shot during the program, rather than as a post-graduation demonstration. Sarah felt a familiar excitement building in her chest. This was the kind of challenge she had come here hoping to find. What would happen if I succeed? If you succeed, you'll become the Academy's first female graduate and the youngest person ever to complete our advanced marksmanship certification. Your name will be added to a very short list of individuals who have achieved this level of precision. Harrison's expression became more serious. But Miss Chen, I need you to understand what you'll be facing. This isn't just about the technical challenge of the shot itself. The other candidates will be watching. The entire Academy staff will be observing. If you fail, it will be very public, and it could undermine everything you've accomplished here. Sarah thought about the risks and the rewards, about the opportunity to prove herself at the highest level the Academy could offer. She thought about the years of preparation that had brought her to this moment, about the knowledge and skills she had accumulated through dedication and persistence. I'll do it, she said without hesitation. Harrison nodded, apparently unsurprised by her answer. Very well. The assessment will take place at 0800 hours tomorrow morning. You'll be using Academy equipment, standardized ammunition, and you'll have one shot to make the hit. He closed the folder and looked directly at Sarah. Miss Chen, regardless of what happens tomorrow, I want you to know that you've already exceeded every expectation I had when you arrived here. You've proven that exceptional skill can come from unexpected places, and you've done it with a level of professionalism and integrity that reflects well on both yourself and this institution. Sarah felt a warmth of pride at his words, but she kept her response simple. Thank you, sir. I won't disappoint you. As she left Harrison's office, Sarah's mind was already focused on the challenge ahead, 3,000 meters. Nearly 2 miles. A distance that would test every aspect of her knowledge and skill, where the smallest error in calculation or execution would result in a complete miss. She spent the evening in the Academy's library, reviewing ballistics tables and atmospheric data. She studied topographical maps of the shooting range, calculating elevation changes and potential wind patterns. She practiced her breathing exercises and visualization techniques, mentally rehearsing every aspect of the shot. Rebecca found her there near midnight, bent over charts and calculations. I heard about tomorrow, Rebecca said quietly. The whole Academy is talking about it. Sarah looked up from her notes. How are people reacting? Mixed. Some of the instructors are excited to see what you can do. The other candidates, well, they're not thrilled about being shown up again. Sarah nodded, unsurprised by the response. What do you think? Rebecca sat down across from her. I think you're either about to make history or crash and burn spectacularly. Either way, it's going to be interesting to watch." Sarah smiled. At her friend's honesty, that's one way to look at it. "Are you nervous?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I'm focused. The technical aspects of the shot are challenging but manageable. The pressure of performing in front of everyone is significant." "You'll do fine," Rebecca said with conviction. "I've watched you shoot for 3 weeks now, and I've never seen you miss a shot you intended to hit. Tomorrow won't be any different." Sarah appreciated the confidence, even if she didn't entirely share it. 3,000 meters was a distance she had never attempted before, under conditions she couldn't fully predict, with equipment she hadn't personally adjusted and tested. But as she lay in her bunk that night, listening to the wind outside and mentally reviewing her preparations, Sarah felt the same calm focus that had served her well throughout her life. She had trained for this moment, studied for it, prepared for it in every way she could think of. Tomorrow she would discover whether all of that preparation was enough. The morning of the assessment dawned clear and cold, with minimal wind and excellent visibility. Sarah woke before her alarm, her internal clock attuned to the importance of the day ahead. She followed her usual morning routine, eating a light breakfast and reviewing her notes one final time. The 3,000-meter range was located in a remote section of the academy grounds, accessible only by vehicle. Sarah rode in a truck with Harrison, Williams, and Thompson, along with several other instructors who had come to observe the historic attempt. The shooting position was situated on a high ridge overlooking a vast valley. The target, barely visible even through high-powered spotting scopes, was positioned on the opposite mountainside. The distance was precisely measured at 3,000 meters, nearly 2 miles of mountain air and variable terrain. Sarah spent an hour studying the conditions, taking measurements with borrowed instruments, and making detailed calculations in her notebook. The wind was light but variable, the temperature was dropping as clouds moved across the sun, and the extreme distance magnified every small factor that could affect bullet trajectory. The rifle was a precision instrument, a custom-built platform chambered in 338 Lapua Magnum with a high-quality scope and match-grade ammunition. Sarah familiarized herself with every aspect of the weapon, testing the trigger pull, checking the scope adjustments, and examining each cartridge for consistency. By 0900 hours, a small crowd had gathered to observe the attempt. Word had spread throughout the academy, and curious instructors and support staff had found excuses to be in the area. Even some of the other candidates had been granted permission to watch from a safe distance. Sarah could feel the weight of their attention, but she forced herself to focus on the technical aspects of the shot. She loaded a single round into the rifle and settled into her shooting position, adjusting her body until everything felt perfectly aligned. The target was so distant that it appeared as little more than a speck in her scope, barely distinguishable from the rocky mountainside. Behind it, Sarah controlled her breathing, settled the crosshairs, and began the mental countdown that preceded every shot. She waited for the perfect moment when all the variables aligned, when the wind was steady, when her breathing was controlled, when her position was stable, when her mind was clear and focused. The shot broke with a crisp crack that echoed across the valley. For what seemed like an eternity, nobody moved. Then, faintly, they heard the distinctive ping of metal on metal as the bullet found its target. Williams, watching through a high-powered spotting scope, confirmed what everyone had hoped to hear. Direct hit. Center of target. The silence that followed was profound. A 3,000-meter shot was considered one of the ultimate tests of marksmanship skill, achievable only by a handful of the world's most accomplished snipers. For a civilian with no formal military training to accomplish it on her first attempt was simply unprecedented. Sarah stood up and carefully unloaded the rifle, her expression unchanged despite the magnitude of what she had just accomplished. She had expected to hit the target, had calculated every variable and prepared for every condition. The shot had gone exactly where she intended it to go. But for everyone watching, the world had just shifted on its axis. The librarian who wasn't supposed to belong had just proven herself to be something extraordinary, something that challenged every assumption they had made about talent, training, and natural ability. As news of the successful shot spread throughout the academy, Sarah found herself at the center of a storm of attention that she had neither sought nor wanted. Instructors who had treated her as a curiosity now looked at her with genuine respect. Academy officials began making phone calls to contacts in various government agencies. And somewhere in a secure office building in Washington, D.C., a file was being created with Sarah Chen's name on it. The woman who had arrived at Blackwater Ridge Academy as an unlikely candidate had just announced herself as something much more significant. The question was no longer whether she belonged in the world of elite marksmanship. The question was what that world was going to do with someone who had redefined what was possible. The weeks following Sarah's historic 3,000-meter shot transformed Blackwater Ridge Academy in ways that no one had anticipated. What had begun as a routine training cycle became the subject of intense scrutiny from military officials, government agencies, and private organizations whose interest in exceptional marksmanship extended far beyond academic curiosity. Sarah found herself summoned to meetings with visitors whose credentials were impressive, but whose purposes remained deliberately vague. Men in expensive suits asked careful questions about her background, her motivations, and her future plans. Women with intelligence agency badges wanted to know about her availability for special assignments. Private military contractors offered lucrative contracts that would begin immediately upon her graduation. Through it all, Sarah maintained the same calm demeanor that had carried her through the academy's most challenging tests. She answered questions honestly but briefly, listened to offers politely but non-committally, and continued to focus on completing the program she had come here to finish. The attention made her uncomfortable, not because she was shy or uncertain, but because it represented a fundamental misunderstanding of who she was and what she wanted. These people saw her exceptional shooting ability and immediately began calculating how it could be monetized, weaponized, or otherwise exploited for purposes that had nothing to do with her original goals. Colonel Harrison seemed to understand her discomfort. During one particularly intense week when Sarah had 3 separate meetings with government representatives, he called her to his office for what he described as an informal conversation. "How are you handling all of this attention, Miss Chen?" he asked, gesturing toward a stack of business cards and contact information that had accumulated on his desk. "It's not what I expected when I applied to the program," Sarah admitted. "I came here to test my capabilities and improve my skills. I didn't anticipate becoming a recruitment target." Harrison nodded. "Unfortunately, that's the reality of demonstrating exceptional abilities in this field. There are many organizations that have legitimate needs for someone with your talents, and many that don't have legitimate needs but want to acquire those talents anyway. That's a perceptive observation. How do you plan to handle these offers?" Sarah had been thinking about this question for weeks. "I plan to finish the program, graduate if I'm able to meet the requirements, and then return to my life in Denver." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Return to library work?" After demonstrating capabilities that could open doors to opportunities most people only dream about. "Library work is what I chose to do with my life before I came here. This program was about personal growth and challenge, not career change. But surely you realize that your skills could be put to use in ways that might have greater impact, greater significance than cataloging books and helping patrons find research materials." Sarah was quiet for a moment, organizing her thoughts. "Colonel, can I ask you something? When you were serving in active combat roles, what kept you grounded? What reminded you of who you were beyond just a soldier?" Harrison seemed surprised by the question. My family, I suppose. My wife, my children. The knowledge that I was serving something larger than myself, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. For me, it's the library. It's helping a student find the information they need for a research project. It's teaching someone how to use a computer for the first time. It's recommending a book to someone who hasn't enjoyed reading in years. Those interactions matter to me in ways that are difficult to explain. She paused, looking out the window at the mountains that surrounded the academy. I developed my shooting skills because I was passionate about precision, about the intellectual challenge of long-range marksmanship, about pushing myself to achieve something difficult. But those skills don't define who I am or what I want to do with my life. Harrison studied her with the same careful attention he brought to evaluating new candidates. That's a remarkably mature perspective, especially given the opportunities you're being offered. Is it though? Or is it just knowing myself well enough to understand what will actually make me happy versus what looks impressive to other people? Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Master Sergeant Williams entered, carrying a folder thick with official-looking documents. "Colonel, I have the final evaluation reports for the graduating candidates," Williams said, then noticed Sarah. "Miss Chen, I didn't realize you were here. This actually concerns you as well." Harrison gestured for Williams to continue. "What's the summary?" "Based on all performance metrics, Miss Chen has achieved the highest scores in Academy history across every category of evaluation: marksmanship accuracy, fieldcraft, tactical awareness, physical conditioning, academic performance. She's not just graduating at the top of her class, she's redefined what we consider possible for our program." Williams opened the folder and spread several charts across Harrison's desk. Sarah could see numerical scores, percentile rankings, and comparative analyses that demonstrated her performance relative to other candidates and historical graduates. "Her overall score is 23 points higher than our previous record holder," Williams continued. "More significantly, she's achieved perfect scores in categories where we've never seen perfect scores before. The long-range marksmanship evaluation, for example. No candidate has ever achieved a perfect score on that assessment." Harrison reviewed the documents, nodding as he absorbed the information. "What about the other candidates in her class?" "They've all performed adequately. Several will graduate with distinction. But there's really no comparison to Miss Chen's achievement. She's operating at a different level entirely." Sarah felt uncomfortable being discussed as if she weren't present, but she remained silent, understanding that this evaluation process was an important formality. "There's one more thing," Williams added, his tone becoming more serious. "We've received formal requests from 7 different organizations asking for first consideration of Miss Chen's services upon graduation. 3 government agencies, 2 private military firms, and 2 international consulting groups." Harrison looked at Sarah. "I assume you've been contacted directly by some of these organizations." "Yes, sir." "I've declined all offers." Williams seemed surprised. "All of them?" "Miss Chen, some of these are extraordinary opportunities. The financial compensation alone would be life-changing." "I'm sure it would be. But as I was just explaining to Colonel Harrison, I have no interest in changing my life in that way." Williams exchanged a glance with Harrison, clearly struggling to understand Sarah's perspective. "Miss Chen, with respect, your capabilities are exceptionally rare. There are missions, operations, situations where someone with your skills could make a real difference in protecting national security, saving lives, preventing disasters." Sarah had heard variations of this argument from multiple visitors over the past weeks. "Sergeant, I understand the importance of that work, and I have tremendous respect for the people who choose to do it. But having the capability to do something doesn't automatically create an obligation to do it, even if it means those capabilities go unused when they could serve a greater good. My capabilities won't go unused." They'll be used in the context of the life I've chosen to live. I'll continue competing in shooting sports. I'll probably take on some teaching and coaching roles. And I'll use the discipline and focus I've developed here in my work at the library. William still looked puzzled, but Harrison seemed to understand. Miss Chen is reminding us that there are many ways to serve, many ways to make a positive impact. Not everyone needs to carry a rifle to make the world better. The conversation concluded with Williams congratulating Sarah on her historic performance, and Harrison scheduling her final graduation interview for the following week. As Sarah left the office, she reflected on how different her experience had been from what she had expected when she first applied to the program. She had come to Blackwater Ridge Academy seeking personal challenge and growth. She had found that, but she had also discovered something about herself that she hadn't fully understood before. Her exceptional shooting ability was real and significant, but it was just one aspect of who she was, not the defining characteristic that others seemed to believe it should be. The graduation ceremony took place on a crisp October morning, with family members and honored guests gathered in the Academy's main auditorium. Sarah's parents had driven up from Denver, their faces glowing with pride as they watched their daughter receive recognition for achievements they still didn't entirely understand. Sarah was called to the stage last, introduced as the most exceptional candidate in Academy history. The applause was genuine and sustained, reflecting not just her accomplishments, but the respect she had earned from instructors and fellow candidates through her professionalism and character. Colonel Harrison presented her with the Academy's highest honors, including a special recognition for her historic 3,000-meter shot. As he shook her hand, he leaned forward and spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. "Miss Chen, you've changed this institution in ways that will last long after you've left. You've proven that excellence can come from unexpected places, and you've done it with a level of integrity that reflects well on everyone associated with this program. Thank you, sir. This experience has been more valuable than I hoped it would be." "What will you do now?" Sarah smiled. "I'm going to go home, take a few days to readjust to civilian life, and then return to work. The Denver library system has held my position, and they're expecting me back next week." Harrison nodded, though she could see curiosity in his eyes. "And if any of those organizations contact you again, I'll continue to politely decline their offers." This was never about changing careers or joining the military-industrial complex. This was about personal growth and challenge. After the ceremony, Sarah spent time with her fellow graduates, sharing contact information and promising to stay in touch. Rebecca had also graduated with distinction and was planning to return to her firefighting career with additional tactical training that would enhance her search and rescue capabilities. Marcus, David, and Tony had all completed the program successfully, though their attitudes towards Sarah had evolved considerably over the 8 weeks. The initial skepticism and resentment had been replaced by genuine respect, even if they still didn't entirely understand how someone with her background had achieved such exceptional results. "You know," Marcus said as they stood together outside, "the auditorium, when you first showed up here, I thought you were completely out of place. I figured you'd wash out in the first week." "I know," Sarah replied with a smile. "You weren't particularly subtle about it." "I was wrong. Not just about your abilities, but about what qualifies someone to be here. I spent so much time focused on military background and conventional preparation that I missed the fact that dedication and natural talent can come from anywhere." David nodded in agreement. "You've taught us all something about making assumptions. I'll remember that in whatever I do next." The farewells were warm but brief. These men were returning to careers in military and private security, while Sarah was returning to a civilian life that most of them couldn't fully comprehend. They would probably never see each other again, but the shared experience of the academy had created bonds that would endure. Sarah's parents waited patiently while she completed her goodbyes. clearly proud but also somewhat overwhelmed by the magnitude of what their daughter had accomplished. During the drive back to Denver, they asked careful questions about her experience, trying to understand what the academy had been like and what her plans were moving forward. "So you're really going back to the library?" her mother asked. "After everything you've achieved here, after all the opportunities you've been offered?" "Mom, the library is where I belong. It's the work I love, the environment where I feel most comfortable, the place where I can make the kind of contribution I want to make." Her father, a man of few words, spoke from the driver's seat. "Your mother and I are proud of you no matter what you choose to do. We just want to make sure you're not limiting yourself out of fear or uncertainty. I'm not afraid of the opportunities I've been offered. I've considered them carefully and decided they're not right for me. There's a difference between being afraid of something and simply not wanting it." Her mother reached back and squeezed her hand. "As long as you're happy and fulfilled, that's all that matters to us." Sarah returned to her apartment in Denver on a Sunday evening, surprised by how normal everything looked after the intensity of the academy environment. Her books were still on their shelves, her furniture was exactly where she had left it, and her plants had survived thanks to a neighbor who had watered them weekly. She unpacked her belongings from the academy, including the certificates and awards she had earned. These went into a drawer rather than being displayed prominently. They represented an important experience and significant personal growth, but they weren't the defining achievements of her life. Monday morning found Sarah back at the Denver Public Library, wearing her familiar professional attire and settling into the routine that had structured her life for years. Her colleagues welcomed her back warmly, curious about her experience, but respectful of her privacy when she made it clear that she preferred not to discuss the details. The work felt comfortable and meaningful in ways that the offers from military contractors and government agencies never had. She helped patrons with research questions, taught computer skills to seniors, organized community reading programs, and managed the complex logistics of a busy urban library system. Her shooting skills hadn't disappeared, of course. She continued to compete in local and regional matches, often traveling to competitions on weekends. Her performance attracted attention from other shooters, some of whom recognized her name from news reports about the Academy's historic 3,000-meter shot. But she kept this aspect of her life separate from her professional work, just as she always had. Her library colleagues knew she was an accomplished competitive shooter, but they didn't need to understand the full extent of her capabilities. It was enough that she was reliable, competent, and committed to the work they shared. 6 months after graduating from Blackwater Ridge Academy, Sarah received a phone call that would have surprised her if she hadn't been expecting it eventually. "Miss Chen, this is Colonel Harrison from Blackwater Ridge Academy. I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, Colonel. It's good to hear from you. I'm calling because we have a situation here that we think you might be uniquely qualified to help with. We have a candidate, a young woman, who's facing some of the same challenges you encountered when you were here. Skepticism from other candidates, assumptions about her capabilities based on her background, pressure to prove herself in ways that go beyond normal program requirements." Sarah wasn't surprised by this call. Her success at the academy had undoubtedly inspired other women to apply, and those women would face the same prejudices and assumptions she had confronted. "What kind of help are you looking for? We'd like you to speak with her, share your experience, maybe provide some perspective on how to navigate the social dynamics while maintaining focus on the actual training objectives." Sarah considered the request. She had no desire to return to the academy environment, but she understood the value of mentorship and support for someone facing similar challenges. "I'd be willing to have a conversation with her, but it would need to be here in Denver. I won't be returning to the academy for visits. That's perfectly acceptable. Her name is Lieutenant Jennifer Walsh, and she's currently in week 4 of the program." Could I give her your contact information so she can reach out to you directly? Yes, that would be fine. Lieutenant Walsh called 2 days later, her voice tight with stress and frustration. She was a West Point graduate with an exemplary military record, but her fellow candidates were treating her the same way Sarah's classmates had initially treated her. The fact that Walsh had legitimate military credentials seemed to make no difference in how she was perceived and treated. They met for coffee on a Saturday afternoon, and Sarah found herself looking at a younger version of herself. Walsh was intelligent, dedicated, and clearly capable, but she was also struggling with the isolation and pressure that came with being the only woman in a male-dominated environment. How did you handle it? Walsh asked after describing her experiences. How did you stay focused when everyone was waiting for you to fail? I reminded myself why I was there, Sarah replied. I wasn't there to prove anything to the other candidates or to meet their expectations. I was there to challenge myself and see what I was capable of achieving. But didn't their attitudes affect you? Didn't it make you angry? Of course, it did. But I learned that I could be angry without letting that anger control my behavior or my performance. I used their skepticism as motivation to exceed even my own expectations. They talked for 2 hours, covering everything from practical strategies for dealing with harassment to broader questions about maintaining identity and purpose in challenging environments. Sarah shared specific techniques for staying focused under pressure, methods for building confidence through consistent performance, and perspectives on using adversity as a catalyst for growth. The most important thing to remember, Sarah concluded, is that their opinions of you don't define your worth or your capabilities. You know who you are and what you're capable of achieving. Trust that knowledge and let your performance speak for itself. Walsh graduated from the academy 6 weeks later with the second highest scores in the program's history. She sent Sarah a brief thank you note, acknowledging that their conversation had helped her maintain perspective during the most challenging weeks of the training. This became a pattern over the following years. Sarah would occasionally receive calls from women who were facing similar challenges in military training programs, law enforcement academies, or other male-dominated environments. She never sought out these mentoring opportunities, but she made herself available when requested, offering support and perspective based on her own experiences. Her shooting continued to improve through regular practice and competition. She won several national championships and set new records in various long-range disciplines. Occasionally, journalists would contact her for interviews about her academy achievements or her competitive success, but she generally declined these requests, preferring to let her performance speak for itself. The offers from military and private organizations never completely stopped, but they became less frequent as it became clear that her position was firm. She had found her place in the world, and it wasn't in the shadowy realm of professional snipers and tactical operations. 5 years after graduating from Blackwater Ridge Academy, Sarah was promoted to head librarian at the main branch of the Denver Public Library System. The promotion recognized not just her professional competence, but also her leadership abilities and her commitment to expanding access to information and educational resources. Her office was modest and functional, filled with books, reports, and the administrative materials necessary for managing a complex urban library system. On her desk, barely visible among the everyday clutter of her work, sat a small framed photograph from her academy graduation ceremony. The photo showed her receiving recognition for the historic 3,000-meter shot, shaking hands with Colonel Harrison while wearing the expression of quiet satisfaction that had characterized her throughout the program. It served as a reminder of what she had accomplished, but more importantly, it reminded her of who she had chosen to be. Sarah Chen had proven that excellence could emerge from unexpected places, that dedication and natural talent could overcome prejudice and skepticism, and that having extraordinary capabilities didn't require abandoning the life and work that provided meaning and fulfillment. She had walked into Blackwater Ridge Academy as a librarian who happened to be an exceptional shooter. She had left as the academy's most accomplished graduate who happened to be returning to library work. The difference was subtle but significant, reflecting a deeper understanding of identity, purpose, and the relationship between what we can do and what we choose to do. In the end, Sarah's story wasn't about becoming someone different. It was about becoming more fully herself, with all the complexity and contradiction that entailed. She had proven that extraordinary achievement was possible without abandoning the ordinary life that gave that achievement meaning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.